So take it from a Canadian to tell you about free trade. A guy whose country now has foreign ownership up to almost 80%. A guy whose country and his countrymen, 36% of them believe, will become a part of the United States within 25 years. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is an arrangement that will take from you your sovereignty in a very powerful and personal way. And it will do it through the same kind of stealth tactics we've been hearing from Glenn and the other panelists. Because American trade policy is manufactured by special interests. And when I mean it's manufactured by special interests, I mean that, for instance, in respect to intellectual property, it is actually drafted by the Motion Picture Association itself. It is then handed to the US Trade Representative, who gets together with the RIAE and other interest groups and works out what the trade strategy is going to be. They then engage in negotiations, and if a country that is a trading partner of the United States does not behave according to US standards of intellectual property protection, for instance, a Section 301 listing can be made, which impacts their ability to continue to work with the United States. It is a coercive form of listing which has forced many countries, including Sweden and European countries, to aggressively change their IP laws and other cultural-related laws to allow them to continue the type of access they believe they need to the US market. Then, and this is somewhat new, once an agreement is reached, and these agreements generally contain language based on largely US norms, once an agreement is reached and your sovereign nation says, fine, we're going to agree with you, United States, there's another process. And this process is called the certification process. And by that I mean that New Zealand, in this case of the TPPA, would actually give up its own rights to certify compliance. That right has been ceded back to the US government, which under this new congressional legislation essentially allows the President of the United States to determine if New Zealand has actually amended its laws in keeping with the agreement. And if New Zealand hasn't, then that agreement will not come into force. So in the case of Peru, for instance, we find that the US government actually drafted the Peruvian legislation to allow them to enter into a trade agreement with the United States. Now, the power of these trade agreements to impact your life directly is very strong, especially when you're in a country that is marginal to the world system. Now, that may be news to John Key, who is a currency trader and gets high fives with Barack Obama. But for the rest of us who have a globe, we recognize that, in fact, China is not quaking in its boots. So the impact means that if you're a trader like John, you have a limited number of chips to give up. And I am going to make an argument here tonight to you. And I am going to say that John, with his limited pile of chips, has begun improvising. And I am going to say that one of the chips he's begun to give up is your rule of law.